Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to our attendees. Maybe one of my panelists can just give me a thumbs up that they can hear me loud and clear. Yep, great, excellent. So I'm the man behind the curtain, Professor Chris Knapp from Bonn University and AASA Treasurer, moderating our second webinar to support you in online learning transitions. So today's webinar is entitled Reviews, Site Visits, and Student Perspectives, the Challenges of Online Learning in Architecture. And so I'd like to welcome you all here today. We're very pleased with the turnout. Just want to quickly introduce our speakers, set out a few just sort of ground rules and expectations, and then we'll get on with our first presentation. So today's panelists include Dr. Daniela Ottman. Daniela has been practicing educating and researching architecture and urban design for over 20 years in various sociocultural environments, climatic zones, and on various scales. Dr. Ottman's expedition took her from various practices and universities from Germany to the UAE, Oman, China, and presently in Australia, where she leads the environmental stream as an associate professor of architecture at the Aberdeen School of Architecture at Bonn University. Secondly, we have Dr. Lara McIntosh, who is an early career researcher and senior lecturer at the University of Notre Dame Fremantle and a registered architect. Her research interests, teaching activities, and architectural practice come together as she coordinates the programs at the Fremantle School of Architecture at the University of Notre Dame, Australia, and builds the community of Notre Dame practice partners within the architectural profession in Perth and Fremantle. And then last but not least, Jacques Breton, you can thank me later, is the national president of the SONA Organized Network of Architecture, representing and advocating for students of architecture in the built environment. Jacques studied his undergraduate architecture degree at the University of Sydney, and in a few months' time, he'll be commencing his master's training at the Royal Danish Academy. And also, I just want to mention that Dr. Mohammed Maki of the University of Technology, Sydney, and also one of the co-founders of Wallasey, who has recently taken up the position of our AASA Online Learning Officer, is going to be helping in the background today with answering some of the chat questions from attendees and also helping with the general facilitation of today's webinar. So thanks very much, Mohammed, for your assistance. So we've just gotten through the introduction. We're going to run through presentations that will be 10 to 15 minutes each. And attendee chat will be disabled during the presentations. And if you have questions, please post them to the Q&A portal. And we'll try to field some of those as we go and collect those to be able to follow up on at the end. And so when we get to the Q&A after the presentations, if you can raise your hand, we'll try to answer questions in the order that they are received. And if there's additional questions beyond the time that we have allotted for today, we'll try to provide answers to those through the AASA website. And similar to our first webinar that we ran, the recording of today's presentation will be uploaded to the AASA website, or at least the links to be able to find those recordings, and you'll be able to access this, this webinar hopefully in perpetuity. And we will also send everyone who's attended and registered a link to those resources. So if you haven't been to the AASA website, this is just quickly what the homepage looks like. You can find the content in the sort of projects tab, and you can also find the tabs quite easy to locate on the home screen. And as I just mentioned, the resources from the first webinar, What is Good Online Learning in Architecture, are available through the link that's highlighted there. And so I just also want to forecast that we have set out dates and themes for 3 future webinars, which will be coming up over the next couple of fortnights, focused on maintaining studio culture, the impact of online learning on the institution, and then hopefully what will be happening sooner than later, making the transition back from our current online or remote status back to face-to-face as a way to wrap up the series. So look out for future details about those. And if anybody in our attendee group has an interest in contributing, perhaps as a presenter, in any of those webinars, you can also get in contact with us. Okay, so I'd like to kick things off today with our first presentation, Dr. Daniela Ottman. And over to you, Daniela. I'll stop sharing my screen and I will leave it to Daniela. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Chris, for the introduction. Also, thank you, Mohammed and Martha, for organizing this webinar, and thanks to all the attendees attending today. I'm pleased to be invited to share some thoughts on final reviews, and I gave it the techy title Nouvelle Vague Review, as an homage to the Casa Malaparte, of course, and Jean-Luc Godard's film in the 1963s as it was shot there. So it's playing on the new vagueness, the new uncertainty after we have actually pursued our final reviews in a normal manner of like being 4 and 5 dimensionally together, being able to discuss, being able to exhibit our models, our physical models, our drawings, being able to communicate with all of our verbal and non-verbal communication ways. And we were able to lead, of course, roundtable discussions and debates, and could come up with some new knowledge and learning out of that process. But then, of course, this nouvelle thing happened and has changed rapidly the way how we now have approached our final reviews, which has led us to a certain new uncertainty, which we can, of course, now also use as an innovation factor. So what we did at the Abedian School of Architecture in our undergrad studio in Design Studio 4, we hosted our final reviews now in the mode of a red carpet screening event hosted online on a platform called Collaborate, which runs via Blackboard. It was all staged in a timely manner. All the students had to pre-record their films and their reflective video portfolios and uploaded to Vimeo, which then could be synchronously looked at by all the invited jury members. So basically we had like 2 different modes of interaction happening. So we had the synchronous watching or screening of the reflective video portfolio, but it was a pre-recorded film by the students. And then after the screening that we all did together, which was on a separate tab, so we didn't use the share screen, the technological errors actually let us down on that. So we have purposefully linked it all up to a Vimeo link, so everyone in the remote attendee era could watch the video synchronously, but not in the same or on the same platform in the same virtual space. After the screening, we all came together again in the Collaborate space and tried to do a discussion. So, and you might have, most of you who have done virtual reviews or have met also in the Collaborate space have maybe also realized that a review in terms of a real debate, of a real negotiation, of a real discussion is quite tricky in that format of, even if we have video chats, it's a very staged in a very not intermediate kind of like discussion platform of communication. And those could be actually seen as hindrances in our current time age of like virtual presentations. That's the reason why I looked at, okay, so what's vague about it? What's vague about a review? That's the reason why I looked at, okay, what's the meaning of like rethinking something or discussing something also in the realm of a final review. And I pulled out again Paul Watzlawicks 5 Axioms of Communication and found out that through remote remote reviews, but also teaching. There are a couple of shortcomings, of course, in our normal way of communication. So the axiom 1, where one cannot not communicate, I mean, if I turn my screen off and my voice off, I cannot communicate. The relationship in axiom 2 is also very difficult to maintain and achieve in a meta communication. The punctuation of the nature of the relationship between the sender and the receiver, between the group, the discussion group, between the student and the teacher, is also quite difficult actually to come across that without involving as well axiom 4 with the analogic modalities. And Paul Watzlawick back in the 1960s meant with analogic the non-verbal expression modes, and the digital ones the very factual and rational communication forms. And axiom 5 in the remote sense also that symmetric, being like on one platform all equal without the time sequenced staging of a conversation is also quite difficult. So now all of you as attendees, you are all basically not symmetrically with me or us on the same platform. And at the same time, of course, in our creative realm, we think of thinking processes that really help to be productive and to focus on creative and lateral thinking. It's the reason why I thought, okay, let's pull out de Bono's 6 thinking hats as well, which I'm not going to go into detail now, but basically this also covers all the different perspectives for a creative design process, but also debate process and lateral thinking processes that, again, especially in our profession and outlook and higher education we're looking at. And there are, of course, also shortcomings or that we have to maybe reinvent as well in our virtual formats. Then I looked at, okay, so how do we view, what are our communication design dimensions? And Julian Crampton Smith divides them into 5 different dimensions. First dimensions being words, second dimension visual representations, as we know from the submission of like posters and graphics and so on. Third dimension, physical objects in space, tangible means of control, 3D physical objects, obviously also in the virtual world. 4D, all of that 3D over time, now sound, film, animation, and I would also include, of course, VR and AR. Although VR and AR might be already somewhere in between, where we have the distinction between 4D and 5D, where we have a behavioral pattern of action, operation, and presentation and reaction already in that, could be possible in that AR, VR room. So to link between the 4D and 5D communication design dimensions. And then I thought, okay, and I'd like to pick your brains, of course, as well as attendees, and see the session more as a let's team together and find out nouvelle and new forms of review patterns. And for that, I thought it would be good to have some sort of like a compass where we can look at the different dimensions over time and formats that we might be inventing for our final reviews to make them as successful in terms of learning outcomes and various and diverse debate culture as well. So here in this little device table, which again, I would like to, at the end of this, invite you to participate as well with your formats and your experiences that you had in your final reviews or that you will be anticipating for your final reviews. And that might be also very important for our peers, that might be in for us all together to find out what nouvelle patterns of that could be. With that, of course, we can also drive some innovation that might be even looked at after we're done with this crisis mode. And we have heaved into a whole new nouvelle way of like teaching and debating and discussing and driving forward architectural education. So this table suggests, or this matrix suggests, that there's a time which is asynchronous or sequential or synchronous. And then over the different dimensions, so it can be 1D words, the 2D graphic depictions, the 3D physical model and virtual model depictions, the animated model over time, the narrated story over time, and then 5D, the behavior that comes in that animated sequence as well. And I've mapped that out now to find out, okay, so where are our innovation potentials to really look at reinventing final reviews in a remote manner? So when we look at what we have done with our red carpet screening, we have viewed synchronously, we have viewed a pre-recorded reflective video portfolio. And at the same time, the review discussion of the panelists was more sequential. And that especially was also, in my opinion, the shortcomings of not being able to entirely replace, of course, an interactive, physical, face-to-face group exchange about the works and discussions about students' works. So then I learned last week from at a after work drinks gathering by Marissa, I learned that she's thinking of like doing a whole different way how to like a design process and also final review. So she's thinking of like doing a design process by letters. So that would be in that matrix a very like an asynchronous way of debating or reviewing the design processes. It's not synchronous getting together. And of course, the way how then this review and staged, there might be deeper or longer time to recap and debate and not really debate, it might be more a dialogue rather than a debate. So it has shortcomings in the debate club realm, but it might have benefits, of course, in leading a dialogue and going deeper into the review of the single word. Then, for instance, what a lot of other reviews that I've encountered, and Justin, for instance, with our master thesis, did that before the review session has happened, which was more like a sequential, again, online format. There was a view or like the preview of the graphical 2D drawings online already visible for the jury, but then a recap or review in a sequential mode as an online presentation platform. And then and this is just the beginning to try to map out what are our possibilities. And I would wish that every one of you attendees could also plug in some ideas and some of your experiences that you had already with those different formats. And then another colleague from another university in Berlin, she told me that they have already staged in this animated 4-dimensional room a virtual gallery also for discussion, for instance, at gaming engines like Minecraft. Of course, we can now add the whole VR, AR component to the 5th dimension and like play around with that. And I would love to hear some of your thoughts on that and how it also has evolved. And I'd like to invite you all to contribute to new final review formats. We will be sending around a link to a shared worksheet where you can then put in your ideas, but also proven experiences about your different design communication dimensions over the different time frames and communication platforms that might be linked to another Excel spread working table that AASA will be sending around on what the different communication platforms could be and are used already, and the experiences, most importantly, that you have in the communication culture of final reviews in that space. Thank you very much. That's it from my side. Over to Chris again, I guess.
Yes, great. Thanks very much, Daniela. All right, and just to, I guess, extend a little bit just the topic of fauna reviews, I also just wanted to share something that I learned about just a couple of days, and this, I think, tacks on to the 4D example of using Minecraft as a potential vehicle for hosting a virtual collaboration. So just yeah, sharing a couple images from the screen here of Assistant Professor Andrew Witt, who teaches at Temple University in the US. And he created an online gallery using Mozilla Hubs, which is a kind of a beta package. Sorry, wrong direction. And so he basically designed his own sort of gallery, obviously some sort of weird virtual background, and set up sort of positions where each of the students could basically, literally hang their work in this virtual space. And also with a little bit of promotion of the Tyler School of Art and Architecture. And what the Hubs also allows is the ability for students to make their own avatars, and the avatars then can basically walk around, and you don't need an Oculus Rift or a headset or anything like that. You can do it right from your desktop. So it sounds like the painful part is just getting the thing set up initially, and then coordinating, getting the students to actually hang their work. Andrew is very excited that Santa Claus is also one of the avatars that can walk around your exhibition. And so there are limitations in terms of the resolution and file size, but basically it gives a way to replicate the idea of students hanging a spread for their final presentation. And then I believe you can also click on the individual images so that you can see things in more detail and so on. So from the sounds of it, and I think this just only happened on Tuesday in the US, this week, it did go pretty well, and he had some pretty good advice about that experience. So just want to pass on. All right, so.
Can I just add something to that, Chris, quickly?
Yep, please.
Because as I did that research to look at AR and VR, and that has been used for galleries as well, I got to UWA's virtual university that they have set up on one of the islands in Second Life. So that is also, I mean, and that was like 10 years ago also, where Second Life really got like the push. And so like exactly those gaming formats on the one hand side, or virtual galleries where I think this 5D behavioral pattern also comes in, where then a more intuitive communication platform could happen, would make it quite attractive. And I'm planning actually for my next studio as well that we have our Obedience School of Architecture in VR. And so I hope that we can plug it in as well in whatever platform, maybe the Mozilla Hub, but also could be in Second Life, and then really try to stage a virtual reality gallery with our colleagues from of course, the VR department.
Yep, excellent, very good. All right, well, we can come back to the topic of fauna reviews in the Q&A. So let's now transition over to Lara McIntosh. And so, Lara, over to you.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. This new online system. Let me just share my screen. And I will get talking. I'm not going to make this full screen. What I'm going to be doing today is actually hopefully bouncing between a number of different videos that I have queued up so that you can see the sorts of things that I'm talking about. So what I'll be talking about today is some of the things that we've been doing in Fremantle around site visits. And thank you to the AASA for the invitation, and thanks for all the participants and the panel for attending today. So I'm using site visits. Let me just give a bit of background. We have a master's only program at the University of Notre Dame in Fremantle. So the sorts of site visits that I'm talking about aren't necessarily those that are geared towards the bachelor program, where you might be going onto site, that I am going onto like a construction site, though I am going to talk a little bit about that. But what I wanted to talk about today was just to think about what the role site visits play in architectural education. And before I start, I thought this was actually acknowledging the country on which our university rests is something we all do quite often, and it's interesting to consider how we're doing that now in a virtual and online situation where I'm not actually standing with my feet on country, but still considering myself as being involved in that part of the land and connecting to that site, if you like. And so I think it's kind of interesting to think about the role of site when we think about our understanding of place, as well as what we're doing in architectural education. So why, whoops, that's a bit too sensitive. Why do we do site visits? The site visits I'm talking about are the visits we might do as part of a design program to go and understand the place in which we are designing. I also talk about site visits as part of the technology and professional practice program as well. And so in education, in architectural education, our understanding of place is really important. It's not just about the potential of that site and how we might respond or how students might respond to that as designers. It's also about understanding, obviously, climate and the physical context, the things that exist on that site, the non-human, the natural that we must share that site with, but also then part of how a place might be used. And we all know how this works. We all understand how this is important to what we do when we design. The other way in which we use site visits, and let me just go back, that picture there is from the Tech and Practice Practicum project that Isabel did as part of Fremantle exhibition, if you like, where various architects and designers had installed different responses to different sites along Fremantle and the Fremantle port. This next image is out of our context unit run by Dr. Robin Cray, where students are understanding the living city and what is important as part of our, I guess, our social connection to the built environment. And so that physical understanding, that physical being, the just being there on site in real time is very important and can be quite a deep and transformative process. So in this new way that we're looking at, and how do we understand, how do we capture some of that transformation and capture some of that powerful and deep learning that a personal experience of site can give us? The last thing I wanted to talk about was site visits, and these are some of our practice partners. Each one of our students is placed in practice in our program. We are lucky enough to be small enough to be able to do that. And I think the benefit of students being placed in practice, and if we think about practice as a site and as a site in which students learn, it's also quite a powerful experience. And it's been very interesting how many of these practices, as they transition to working from home, so to have our students and then that connection. And so this is just a snapshot of the connection that we had when we had a group meeting, just touching base with our practice partners. So what happens when you can't get to site? How do you not substitute or make up for, but how do you enable that deep learning, that transformative learning, those different points of view, the understanding of experience that you get when you go to site? I think my invitation to come and talk to you today was prompted by a statement that I had made where having to do things online, particularly for a professional practice course, which is what this was for, made me think about how I can connect with colleagues in ways that I probably wouldn't have thought of before, but which were still available to me. And it's been interesting about how often that has happened in this new online environment that we're at. A lot of the technology has been around for ages, as Daniela had said. It's just that all of a sudden we're thinking of using it. So I invited Dave Gibson from PTX Architects down in Denmark in the southwest of Western Australia to talk to us about Strawberry Hill Visitor Centre. And as this was for a professional practice course, not a specifically tech course, he was walking us around the site and able to explain the process of design and this particular project and stakeholder engagement as he was walking around the site. So I'm going to have a go at sharing some of that with you. Oh. So you're not going to be able to hear what he's talking about because I forgot to press the button. Sorry, Mohammed. So in that particular video, he's talking about the history of the place, the beautiful trees that you can see on site, and you can hear the enthusiasm in his voice, which is also really useful. What I am going to do, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and start sharing it again. Sorry, Mohammed, and click that button there so that I can share my computer sound with you. So that when we come to the next video from Dave, you can hear him talking about the song lines on the site.
And this is not mapped, this song line, and often these they're not mapped for a good reason, that, you know, out of sensitivity towards the traditional owners. But the song line is somewhere to the north here. So this is the old workers' cottage here, and if I pan around to the north, it's somewhere in that vicinity up there. There's remnants to it to the west behind this. See if you can see a house.
And what I like about that video is it's unscripted. It's just Dave walking around site, to be honest, using his mobile phone, so very low tech, but you get an understanding of the sorts of things that he's looking at when he goes to site. And what I feel is important here is that it's demonstrating to the students the importance and the relevance of some of the things they might have read about. They've all done previous units looking at Indigenous histories and dual histories, and it's interesting, I think, to be able to hear someone talk about how to apply that so that next time they go to site they can then do that. The final video I have from Dave is him talking about stakeholder engagement with traditional owners.
A really beautiful project where the stakeholders are involved all the way through. So we've met multiple times in the early concept design stage with the traditional owners, but also any ground disturbance on this site requires monitoring by traditional owners. So that happens all the way through the process. So what we're looking at, I'll just span around now. This is currently the site, and these are the holes for the footings for the structure. All of these have been monitored on the last couple of days, all of this digging. So the owners are always here and involved with the project.
And then once again, what I like about that, and it's not a very high-tech site either, and it's very early in the stage, but you're able to look at and see how some of the pre-design and the design work is actually applied on site. We also used Dylan. Dylan, I'm going to have a bash at his surname, Korzinski, is from our science department at the School of Arts and Sciences at Notre Dame, and we used Dylan. Dylan visited site when we couldn't. Dylan is a botanist and has an enormous amount of enthusiasm, and the reason why I wanted to include this in here, Dylan typically teaches to undergraduates. His enthusiasm is palpable, but he also uses quite a few techniques to be able to demonstrate how you might look at plants, how you might talk about the site. The use of the video and then putting the text over that allows you to sort of deepen the way in which people are, and prompt how people might be thinking about it. It also allowed Dylan to correct when he had made a mistake about a plant identification. And you can see, I think, the enthusiasm that he has and the passion. So where you might have picked that up in a face-to-face, it still comes across here. And he also starts to demonstrate how you might look in depth at these particular plants. And I'm hoping that this encourages the students to, you know, really get stuck in there and start to play around in the dirt, to look at the soil beneath it and all this sort of stuff. It wasn't things that we would have necessarily thought about. So it was a great way of getting Dylan to, or getting that enthusiasm and that different point of view to come across. The other technique that we've been doing is point cloud mapping, which is being done by Spatial Co. And while I'm talking, I'll just run that video through there. This is on Instagram and will be on the link in the PowerPoint. And as another way of understanding site, so this is actually our campus in Fremantle, for those who are unfamiliar with Fremantle, and our students are currently designing, their designs are situated in this space through here. So they're using point cloud mapping to explore the site when they can't necessarily go there in person. We've also done some, in other programs that we run at Notre Dame, we've done some talking about site visits for understanding sustainable development, which is an elective unit and has first year to third year bachelor students in it. So me and a colleague walked around the site and described what we were looking at and have made that video available. And what I really liked about that was the informal nature of it. So you get to hear this conversation between me and a colleague, and students can then start to think about and unpack that. Of course, that's supported by formal classes in Blackboard, but I'm hoping that it gave students a way of thinking about things that they might not have normally done, particularly because they're not architecture students. Some of them are teachers, some of them are environmental scientists, some of them are even for outdoor ed. And walking around and literally pointing at things opens their eyes up. So next time they go on site, they can think about it in a certain way. And then, of course, there are the more technical side of things. So then you can, many of the public buildings, and Perth has a few, you can access the time lapse. This is the Perth Arena going up with this amazing structure that was, yeah, watching this go up in real time was amazing. Being able to see it in a time lapse even better. And I really enjoy using these sorts of visits to talk to students about the more technology side of things, the structure, et cetera, and also just the sheer logistics of building something of this scale. And it has been for a very long time very difficult to get students onto these sites, but many projects, and in fact many architects these days, have drone footage of their sites, time-lapse videos of their sites, which are all accessible. And of course, it's not news. So at the University of Melbourne, Hannah Louie and her team have been looking at fieldwork learning and have developed some tools that are available. There's a number of case studies on this website that I have found quite useful, and I've heard Hannah talking about these. It's the use of technology that really guides students when they go on site independently. And for me, I think that that has been the key point of all of this online, is that it's not about trying to simulate what it's like to be on site, but to allow students, when they do go on to site or to a place, to develop those skills of critical thinking, of looking at places in new ways through a new lens, independently. And for me, that's the skill that they're developing when they go to site. It's not just about the content of what they're looking at, but how they're thinking about what they're looking at that will carry them through. So, oh no, now I've got to work out how to get back. There we are. I will stop sharing my screen. Thank you, Chris. I'm not quite sure how I was going for time.
No, it's perfect. Spot on. Thank you very much, Lara. Okay, and now we'll shift to our third and final presentation for today's webinar. So, Jacques Bertin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris. I'll just share my screen. 1 second. Perfect. All right, so I'm assuming you can all see my screen. Recently at SONA, we got all of our representatives in all of our universities to provide us with a report based off student sentiment regarding the changing landscape of architectural education. Now, I'll just cover a few broad things before I go into the information that we collected. So we got all of our reps to provide us with a report. Previously, we were missing 2 from Curtin and 1 of UNSW, but we got them. So we've got a strong report, and this is all from within Australia. It's not including New Zealand yet, but I did speak to SANS this morning, and we will indeed be getting a report from each SANS university and a student from within there as well. Now, we do accept that the majority of our SONA representatives are undergraduate students. In response to that, I conducted some informal conversations just to essentially double check the information that we received from some of our undergraduate representatives to make sure it aligned with what was occurring with master's students. And from the conversations I did have, it was. So I would say that the information we gathered is definitely worth considering as we move forward. So I have gathered an overview, and then I've sort of broken down the information broadly into a SWOT analysis so we can see, you know, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and obviously the threats that we're going to be facing. So generally, there's the need to ensure that all staff and are well versed within whichever LMS the university is using. There has been some confusion, I think, in the receipt of information through the LMS from the students. So that's definitely something that could be done. But in general, the communication from faculties and universities to students has been really, really consistent and clear from the get-go, which is great. Many faculties are updating students week on week, which is, of course, very important. I guess, you know, requirement for all lectures and tutorials now to be recorded for students is extremely exciting and valuable for all students. There's no need for that to stop as we progress. Tutorials, which are in person perhaps, but all lectures and secondary presentations, obviously, be great for them to continue to be recorded. So the financial grants and additional student hardship funds were very well received and are very beneficial. With that in mind, however, you know, we understand that it's had to be done on the fly, probably quite quickly, for these additional grants to be allocated and the funding to be made available, but making sure that the eligibility is really clearly communicated and that exactly what documentation is required to apply is made really crystal clear. There has been some confusion in the communication of that, so that would probably be beneficial to students. Now, digital lecture portals. I've heard of a few, especially RMIT and Deakin Air, where they've made available previous lectures through a dedicated portal, and that's been extremely well received, adding to the motivation and excitement of students across undergrad and master's programs. Now, some universities have been providing additional Q&A sessions to students. I'll probably touch on that again in the opportunities, but this has been extremely welcome to students, especially when there may be some technical difficulties experienced during tutorials. So I'll go through some weaknesses. There has been, we've been made aware of some reductions in contact hours. Now, despite the shift to virtual delivery, obviously Corona has had a shocking effect on the delivery of education, and it's not that it's bad, it's just that it's shifted everything, and you know, everyone is understanding of it. But a reduction in hours when you still have students paying the same fees they were should not be occurring. Now, the mental health and wellbeing helplines and communication sent out by faculties is constant, but it does need to be communicated clearly. Now, the level of accessibility students have to academic staff is of absolute importance now that we're working from home and studying from home. I understand it's difficult, and I think SONA and students across Australia understand it's difficult to get your staff to respond potentially more than they were before when some are running businesses and working full-time jobs as well. But if there is anything that can be done to reinforce that with academic staff, I think it'd be extremely valuable. Yeah. Now, contacting students on a regular basis through faculty-wide emails to make sure that everyone's okay and providing helpline advice in terms of mental health and wellbeing, it's all great, but it is a bit impersonal. Now, I understand it's something the faculty can do and it's great, but there has been discussion of some students receiving a bit more personable communication from their tutors and lecturers in regards to how are they going, how are they actually going, here are some things they can do, here are some websites to go to for additional knowledge, here's what you can read if you've got spare time, and more personable contact on behalf of academic staff like that goes a lot further. Now, any changes in expectations that are occurring in regards to assessments, criteria, marking as well, we understand that's happening pretty much across the board, but it does need to be communicated really clearly. There has been some bumps in this, and obviously that can't be avoided because of the way the landscape has changed, but it should be, if the faculty can, have more oversight. So there are obviously plenty of opportunities with the shifting approach to education. Now, in terms of mental health and well-being, a lot of the information we did gather suggested that it could be helpful to have a faculty-specific survey that the faculty was in charge of, to understand how their students specifically are responding to this, to the crisis in studying from home. Because, you know, we understand students at one university may be responding differently to those at another. Circumstances are different, approaches to education are different. The quality of work. Now, there is concern from students that their own quality of work is being affected. That's affected by many things, but when you've got changing assessment criteria, what could be of benefit to students who want to use this work later on and to improve on and to potentially use in their portfolio is to, instead of reducing the expected quality of submission, is to just consider reducing the amount of deliverables, so that students can also still feel extremely proud of the work they're doing, even though there might be 1 or 2 less deliverables. Now, here's where I touch back upon that additional Q&A session. The importance of that cannot be understated. You've got students which are, I think, nervous. We've come across our survey information, nervous and shy, and an online tutorial environment through Zoom or Teams is not always the most welcoming format for students to ask a question that they might be unsure about something. And there have been some tutors and professors who have been very helpful in providing additional time to students, and some even doing one-on-one Q&As if need be. And that's been very, very well received by students. There is also the opportunity to consult with a group of students within the built environment faculties that can represent a more local voice. Now, that's obviously going to be the faculty's decision, but it would be a recommendation from SONA to do so, to ensure that any changes that are made towards the delivery of education are done with students as a stakeholder in that process. Going online, obviously, is, you know, now's a great time to be putting in place a mentoring system. There is, I think it was one of the universities in Western Australia, apologies, there was a lot of information to go through, that started their mentoring system at the beginning of this year. And I think we can all understand the importance of doing so when we have first year students that would have started at the beginning of this year, not understanding what a studio environment is normally like and what it should be like. So at the moment, there's a relative ease of setting up a mentoring system. So first years with 3rd and 5th years. I know some universities may have this in place, but if there was a time to start it, the time is now. Now there is the additional opportunity to interact with students and share information. Melbourne used the MSD discussion board, which is on Facebook. It's a Facebook group. Other universities like Sydney Uni, they have a Facebook group, sorry, for each year level in architecture, where students can post, where faculty staff post things, and they talk about all sorts of issues that are facilities based, and now obviously it could be information based as to what's been communicated, what may have been missed via emails. Now I would stress as well that informal communication has just as much value as formal faculty-based communications using the email system at your university. We did identify through the data we collected that there could be the potential of exploring splitting students in tutorials when they're not receiving direct feedback from their tutors in studio. Now this would also allow international students, which are particularly feeling the brunt of this COVID-19, to gain a bit more of a sense of community and to interact with students they might not necessarily usually interact with. And not only that, but it also helps students think critically. And Parler's survey from last year in education and the profession, thinking critically was the #1 of the top 2 skills identified and valued by the profession. And here again, I touch upon international students. they are paying high tuition fees. I think we're all aware of that, and we understand the stress that universities are going through to try and retain them as well at the moment. Faculties should be paying attention to their needs. What can be done needs to be identified at a university specific base, but there is the opportunity to provide international student specific socializing on virtual platforms. And again, like I said before, breaking down the studios into smaller groups prior to receiving feedback on their work could be a way of starting that discussion. So obviously a few threats, which I'm sure you're all aware of. Internet access that are dependent upon the stability of the internet connection. So this is why it's so important that tutes and tutorials and studios on top of the lectures that are usually recorded are also recorded and made available. You've got many students which are having difficulty participating even in a studio because their internet connection is unreliable. And then accessibility to software. If there is a platform, if there is information that the faculty and the university has that can enable students to access the rendering software they need to at a discounted fee or at a student license fee for free, that needs to be communicated as soon as possible if it has not already been. There is a great sense of having lost motivation this semester. I don't think that would have been avoidable, but I'd greatly encourage all faculties and all academic staff to investigate and to consider ways of trying to boost motivation, be that through additional lectures which are recorded or providing additional resources. Where can students go for more information to get inspiration from even? That's something that's come up again and again and again is a loss of motivation. I don't have the answer to it. SONA doesn't have the answer to it, but it's something I think we can all try and explore and see what our students respond well to. Now I'm at 13 minutes here. I'm going to try and stick within the time limit. In an attempt to be as transparent as possible, the link which I'll send through to the chat group has all of the survey responses there as a PDF format so that you're all able to view them. I've essentially synthesized all of it and put it together in this one presentation as an overview. I think transparency is something we really need in our industry. But if you can also, in the link I'm going to send through, there is a small Excel sheet. If you do take on board some of the information that we've presented and that we've gathered in the reports, and you do respond and make changes, it'd be really interesting to know what you do and how you do it. So if you could add to that, that would be amazing. And I think that wraps it up. And if you do have any questions at all, be very happy to answer them. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jacques. And thanks very much, Lara and Daniela, for your presentations as well. There's a lot of really good information in there. Yeah, I think particularly hearing a lot of those student experiences and points of view, Jacques, are particularly useful for the educators in the room. So at this stage, we have gotten to, we're just before 1 o'clock of a 1 hour sort of scheduled webinar. But we're very happy to take the opportunity to open this up for some discussions and some Q&A. I haven't seen much in the way come through in the Q&A portal from the attendees, but very happy to open the floor if there are some questions. And also if our panelists have any questions of each other as a way to generate a bit of discussion as well. Bueller? Anybody?
Chris, it's not a question, but I just wanted to thank Jacques for taking the initiative and doing that survey with the students. It was, I also sit on an education committee, and it's super useful to hear that some of the things that our students in WA are going through is common across the board. I think it is really useful to know that we're all feeling, all the students are feeling very similar to that. So that was super useful. Thanks, Jacques.
That's right. Thanks, Lara. I will just clarify as well. It wasn't my idea. It was our Queensland representatives that did spearhead this, and it was, I'll put my camera on. It was their idea, and they did it for their local education committee. And I learned about it and thought it'd be a great initiative to understand everything we've learned and be able to share that with all the universities.
Very good. And we do have a question that just came through to Lara, asking, did you engage in live conversations during virtual site visits with students through Collaborate?
Yeah, so that was the video I showed from Dave was actually a Collaborate session. So, and it's super low tech. So he was walking around with his mobile phone. And what I didn't show you were the bits where you could see his head going, can you see this? And me interjecting and going, yes, it's fine. And also, while Dave spoke to us for about an hour, I stopped and started the recording on Collaborate at key moments so that it was, so when I posted it, it was smaller chunks rather than one big long chunk. But yeah, that was definitely live. All the students were in the class at the same time, but they've also been able to go back and listen to that as well. Thanks, Steve.
Excellent question. Are there other questions from the group before we?
Sorry, Chris, can I say one thing about that? What I'm really excited about, it would be amazing if you could get, that was just a spur of the moment thing. It would be amazing to think that you could get a site foreman or an architect as they were doing their normal day-to-day site visits with a GoPro or whatever, and then start to share that. I think the issue of getting hundreds, like 100 students on site has been an issue for a very long time now. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, hopefully that's, you know, when we come out the other side of this, a lot of the innovating that we're currently doing will hopefully last, and we'll be able to, you know, utilize and incorporate these tools going forward. Daniela.
I have a question for Lara, or maybe it could be like a comment, or I would be really interested in your archive on those time lapse and site visit videos. Maybe the AASA can also host an archive or platform where we can chuck in all of those sources and resources as well, internationally as well. I think that would be great. I mean, I can contribute some stuff that like from overseas, some drone footage of like huge construction sites and so on. And I think it would be great to accumulate all that information.
Yeah, that's a really great idea, and I think it'd be wonderful to collate all of those. For me, it's nothing more complex than a Google search. So, because I know you know what it's like. You know that there's different sites going on around town and all that sort of stuff, and so you just, particularly the public ones, you Google them and you can find out that they're always there and often publicly available. But happy to share.
And that's something that we'll try to do through AASA, is to collate these resources and try to, you know, if we have things like that, links, you know, repositories and so on, we can continue to accumulate those on the AASA website, and we can try to notify members as things are updated. We had I guess more of a comment than a question come through from Joe Kinneber. So thank you for that, Joe, just in relation to acknowledging country and that being something that could be, I think, easily overlooked in this kind of remote or virtual setting. And I think that was a really important contribution to make as well. And just looking at the chat, also a comment just about the Mozilla Hub. As far as I'm aware, that sample sort of hub environment that Mohammed created can probably stay live for others to have a look at. Just the Mozilla Hub's site, from my just sort of poking around there, there's some examples and things like that on that site too. And let's see if there's other questions coming through. One question from Melanie for Jacques was about SONA doing another kind of check-in with students in June at some point. So maybe hearing how students' experience has sort of progressed and getting some real-time feedback.
Definitely, I think, and also seeing universities have changed their response as well, if they have. But yeah, definitely, Melanie, that's the intention for sure.
Yeah, fantastic. And a private question went through to Daniela, but I might just share it with the group because I think it's a useful question just about, so in Daniela's design reviews, which only just happened on, I think that was the 16th of April, so they're quite fresh in the mind. What were the students' responses to that digital review experience? Did you get any sort of anecdotal feedback from the students about what it was like to present in that sort of mixed mode delivery.
So I had a debriefing session with them after the day the final reviews have happened, and it was actually surprisingly very positive, although they were, I mean, like forced to really completely change their modus of presentations. Of course, they didn't like that they didn't have like the face-to-face and physical kind of like interaction of the communication. And that's the reason why, again, like I thought in this little wrap up here, how we can look at innovative formats. But the overall feedback from the students was really quite positive, and they quite liked as well that they had pre-recorded their video in their presentation, but put it not just as a recording as a normal presentation, but really as an artistic creative piece of a reflective video portfolio, not just a linear kind of like presentation, but really something where they made a film project out of it to showcase their presentations in their project. So they were excited about that, about the filmmaking as well.
Fantastic. Well, so look, we're a few minutes past 1 now. There haven't been any new questions that have come through in the past couple minutes, and I can see our attendee list is also dropping away. So just to I think, make a quick wrap up, I just want to say thank you again to our presenters. Really appreciate everybody putting in the effort to organize and contribute to today's discussion. And I also just want to again remind the attendees that we have left, that we have in a fortnight from now our next webinar, Maintaining Studio Culture and Online Learning, happening on the 15th. So some information will be coming through on that. And so with that, we can draw to a close AASA webinar number 2. Thanks again to Daniela Ottman, Lara McIntosh, and Jacques Chevron-Breton, and also with our online support from Mohammed Maki, and also I should acknowledge the Secretariat of AASA, Martha Liu, who is also indispensable in helping put all of this activity together. So thanks again, and look out for the recording of this event. See you next time.